It's all you. Take it away, Mike.
All right. Well, thanks for the opportunity. My appreciation to AppWorks for the invite. What we're going to do is something that Matt asked for, which was the basics of the FileMaker Data API. So I chose to call it How to Spell API. So some of you this might be a little bit elementary. So I'd ask you to bear with me while we run through some of the details at the lower levels and maybe get to something you don't know. So a little bit about myself. I started, like many FileMaker developers, building workgroup solutions. I had a completely different job, and FileMaker was just a great tool to get things done. And I liked it so much that I moved to being a full-time developer in 2002. And I started Netcaster Solutions in 2013 when I decided I didn't like the corporate world as much as I liked working for myself. I am a 12 through 18 certified developer, and I was one of the original 5 community MVPs on the community. So some personal stuff. I am married to my lovely wife of 8 years, and I am a keyboard player. Play at the church and basically lead the praise team there. And then these are our 11 furry little children. We never meant to start an animal rescue, but that's kind of the way it worked out. We love them all, and we both have cat allergies, so go figure. All right, so what is an API? Well, API stands for Application Programming Interface. It is typically used for web-based interfaces accessible via secure HTTP. It is the absolute key to the modern web economy. Whenever you see applications talking to each other across the web, they are almost always using some form of API. So that's very nice and exciting and whatever, but why should I care? Well, it's the standard for inter-app communication on the web. And specific to FileMaker, here are some of the use cases. These are some of the reasons why we care. Say you have an external app that needs access to FileMaker data. For example, one of our clients is currently in the process of building a mobile app that will access their FileMaker solution. They're going to use the FileMaker Data API to do it. If I want to access a web service and then have that web service talk back to my FileMaker app through something called webhooks, then the data API would be used in that case as well. So say I have a FileMaker app and I need access to another FileMaker app. Well, normally you might say, well, why don't I just put that app on my relationships graph or have people open it through the FileMaker client? Well, the owner of that other app might not want you in his app, and he might not want you putting table occurrences to his app in your app for one reason. Another reason might be, say his app goes down and you have his table occurrences on your graph. Well, now all of a sudden, all your users are getting messages that say, hey, I can't find this file. That might not be the best way to do things. Okay? Say I want to move data between FileMaker apps, and I want to do it in a way that doesn't require me to have credentials from one app to the other. Well, the data API allows me to do that. I can also fetch database metadata, things like field names, table names, layout names, through the API. And I can also program standardized external modules, such as event or performance logging or script libraries that I can just drop onto any server, and then the app can use the API to interact with these modules. And again, I don't have to worry about data sources. I don't have to worry about putting things on my graph. I can just use the API script to do what they do. All right, so what do we need in order to use this marvelous tool? Well, you need basically FileMaker Server. However, there is an exception. There's a new script step in version 19 that allows you to access the local database file with some data API commands. We will not cover that in this presentation, but it is available. Okay. You also need an SSL certificate with a secure connection. The API will not function unless your server has SSL encryption. So we're going to be focusing for today just on the FileMaker Data API. There may be some things different with other APIs you interact with. For example, there is a FileMaker Admin API that allows you to interact with the admin console. There are other APIs out there on the web. There's thousands of them that you may be interacting with. So we're going to focus just on using the FileMaker Data API for today. So what tool set do I need? What do I need to know in order to use this? Well, for one thing, you need to build layouts. Now, pretty much any FileMaker developer knows how to build layouts, but the API is layout centric, and we'll see that in some of the later examples. Everything you do in the API has to reference a layout. And the construction of those layouts can be important because it will affect the data that are returned by the API, and therefore you can control not only what data are exposed, but you can also control how much bandwidth you consume and how performant your application will be by controlling what you put on the layout. I need to know something about FileMaker scripting. When I receive data from an external API call, I need to know what to do with it, and usually that will involve some form of scripting to parse it out. I will also need to write scripts to access the other FileMaker file or to access the external APIs. One thing that you absolutely must be able to do is form and parse JSON. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about some JSON fundamentals, but if you cannot do JSON, you will not be able to work with the API. And you will need to know some of the basics of HTTP communication. And we're going to cover that here in just a minute. So here's some basics of JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It is a structured way of presenting data, very similar to XML in concept, but quite frankly, a whole lot easier to work with than XML. I heard one presenter at DevCon one year compared parsing XML to chewing on razor blades, and he's not far off. Now, typically, JavaScript objects or JSON objects are name value pairs. So for example, this would be a small JSON object. Field name 1 is assigned the value of field value 1, and field name 2 is assigned the value of field value 2. This would be a very simple JSON object. Okay, now notice the curly braces. The curly braces indicate that this is an object. If they were square brackets, they would indicate an array. Now, arrays in JSON are 0 indexed. So the first element in the array is element 0. This is different from, for example, FileMaker repeating fields, where the first object or the first instance is a 1. So if I go to repeating field repetition number 1, it's similar to going to JSON array element 0. Objects and arrays can be nested. I can have objects inside arrays. I can have objects inside other objects. I can have arrays inside objects. Okay. It's important to learn the FileMaker functions for creating, editing, and parsing JSON. They've been given to us. They work very well, and we'll see some of that when we go to the demo file. JSON set elements. What does it do? It sets an element in a JSON object or array. JSON get elements. Well, it does the same thing, except it gets the element. It fetches the value. JSON list keys lists the key values of an object or array, and JSON list values lists the values. Remember, it is done in key value pairs. The keys for an array are the indexes. The keys for an object would be the object names. JSON delete element allows you to remove an element from a JSON object or array. And probably my favorite of the functions, JSON format elements, puts it in a human readable form. You will see very quickly that a JSON object of any size becomes very difficult to parse out with the human eye. All right, HTTP basics. HTTP stands for the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It is the communication standard for the World Wide Web. It's based on a request-response system. Each client sends a request, and then the server replies with a response. The World Wide Web does not work on a persistent connection basis like FileMaker Server does. FileMaker Server remains in communication with all the clients at all times. Now, but on the web, it's based on a client requesting something, the server sends back a response, and from that point forward, the server doesn't care what the client does. It does not keep track of it. Honestly, the web could not work if it tried to maintain a persistent connection. All right, so elements of an HTTP call include the method. The methods used by the FileMaker Data API include get, post, patch, and delete. Headers, the endpoint, or sometimes called the URL, the data or the payload, as it's sometimes called. The FileMaker Data API guide, and there's the link to it. It's in the help system. It gives you specifics for each type of call you may want to make. And we will look at several common calls when we get to the demo file. Okay, so the method. The documentation will tell you what method each action you take will require. So for example, if I'm going to log into a database session or create a record, duplicate a record, or perform a find request, I use the post method. The post method is what you will typically see in a web page when it's submitting a form or form data. All right. A single record, a range of records, or metadata requires a get. A get method is typically what you would see in your internet browser when you just type the URL of a web page into your browser's address bar. That's a get method. Okay. Edit a single record or setting global field values would be a patch method. And finally, if I want to log out of a database session or if I want to delete a record, it would use the delete method. Our form in curl, and we'll talk about curl in just a little bit, is -x with the method included. This is the syntax that you use to tell the server what method to treat this call as. Okay, the endpoint. All calls to a given FileMaker server using the Data API have the same basic parent endpoint, which is HTTPS. Remember, we're using secure HTTP. The server name, which would be the DNS server name, /FMI/data/version /databases/database name. All right, the server name is the DNS server name, like I mentioned. The version can either be V1 or V latest. If you are a slow adopter, such as myself, you would stick with V1 until V2 comes out and you're comfortable that V2 didn't screw up something that you had in place. If you're brave and you're a trailblazer, then you can use V latest. And that way you don't have to change your code when they release a new version of the API. The database name does need to be URL encoded. Now, make your life easier. Avoid non-URL characters in file names like spaces or pound signs or percent signs. Stick to alphanumerics in your database names and you will have a lot fewer headaches. Plus, when someone else wants to interact from the outside, maybe someone who is not a FileMaker developer, it won't look strange to him with all of that URL encoded stuff. Okay, as a best practice, we suggest storing your base URL, which is that string above, for each app in a field and fetch it when you need it. That way, it's dynamic, and if you happen to move servers or you change the version number, all you have to do is update the data in a field rather than go into all your scripts and change something. Okay, so headers. Typically, the content type and the authorization are required for data API calls. Now, in some cases, there are other headers required that's in the documentation if you need it. So for example, -H, which says header, content type : application/JSON tells the server that the content type of this call is an application in JSON format. This is a typical content type header for most of the calls in the data API. Okay. Oops, this one, sorry. Authorization basic is another header, and we'll see that in the sample file. Okay, payload. I accidentally went ahead too quickly. Okay, the payload is not required for all calls, especially your get calls will not typically have a payload. Okay, the payload is typically a JSON object. Sometimes, some calls, an empty JSON object is required, and we will see that with certain calls. So, for example, -d data. The -d is the curl command for the data object or the payload. Now, when I assemble my FileMaker syntax, there's a couple of little tricks involved with this. So for example, this would be the curl commands or the syntax. If I was to put this in a FileMaker calculation field, I would see this calculation for opening a database session. So it might look something like this: post, dump header, response header, -h, quote, content type application JSON, quote, authorization basic, such and such, with that's basically a token. And we'll explain more about that in a little while. Now, take a look at that and tell me if you see anything that looks out of place. Plus we have our data element. See if you see anything that looks out of place in a FileMaker calculation. I'm going to wait a couple of seconds so you can take a look. Okay, so did you catch it? Look at these two lines. Why do we have variables inside quoted text? Won't FileMaker just parse that out and just say $response header, $data? Well, as it turns out, when it processes the insert from URL script step, which is what we're going to use to interact with the API, it actually parses out these variables correctly. If I have a $response header, it's going to dump the header information into that variable, which I can then extract with my script after the call. And in this case, the @ symbol tells it, okay, insert at this point the $data variable value, the data that are stored in that variable. Okay, and we will see how this works in the sample file. So we've got all these curl commands that I've mentioned before. Now, what is curl? Curl is command line URL. It's basically a command line set of instructions that you can use to send HTTP requests to servers. If you want to know what the supported options are, they're going to be, again, on the help page under that URL. FileMaker supports a wide range of curl commands. Don't worry, you don't have to learn all of them. You only have to learn a few to interact with the data API. Okay, so the key script step, like I mentioned, is going to be your insert from URL script step. I recommend that you use the curl options with that script step because number one, curl is a universal standard and lots of people understand it. Number two, when we talk about another tool we're going to talk about in a minute, you can actually copy and paste and modify your curl directly from that tool. So if I look here at my insert from URL script step options, there at the bottom you see the specify curl options button, and that is where you will insert your curl. Now, remember that I mentioned we were going to talk about another tool here. There's a tool called Postman. This is extremely useful. It is a free tool that you can download from www.postman.com. It allows testing your API calls before you get to the coding stage. That's very handy for those of us who are fumble-fingered and maybe don't understand what all the right syntax should be. Now, another really cool thing about Postman is there is a free FileMaker collection for Postman from Listerius, and that's located on GitHub at that address. That means I can download this collection, load it into my Postman, and I will have all the FileMaker calls pre-built for me. All right, let's look at our demo file. So I'm going to go over to FileMaker. Now notice here we have a very simple file, and I have the request, what I want to do. And for some reason my screen is going wonky here, but we're going to open an API session with this call. Okay, I have another file up on our production server, which I'm going to open up here. Okay, now I don't know if everybody can see this okay, but this is basically a long list of email addresses and types of emails. This is not real data. These are generated by a dummy file, so it's perfectly okay. We're not going to insult anyone or send any weird emails. All right, but in this file, I have set up a settings where you can see this is the base endpoint. Now this is our server's address here, and then you can see v1 is what I put in for the version and the name of the database file. That is going to be the basic endpoint for everything we do. Now notice here under endpoint, I have base endpoint / sessions. Documentation tells me to open a session, I need to send a request to the base endpoint / sessions. I'm going to run a script in my file here. And that script, we got a little FileMaker 1913 bug here, but it's going to say open the API session sample file. So what I've done here is I've abstracted this so it executes the script you see here when I push this button. All right, so let's run that script. All right, when I run that script, the server returns this information. Now I've got a tab over here where it shows me the pretty information, except it's not working on the screen share for some reason. Oh boy. All right, anyway, we'll run the script again. Notice I've got our current token down here. I've extracted the token. Let's look at our script. Okay, so I have a script here that fetches the base endpoint, and I take that. I add the base endpoint / sessions. Here's where all the meat happens. Remember how I said we had our curl? I'm going to blow this up a little bit so everybody can see it. Okay, so this is our calculation. Now this token right here, when I first open a session, I'm going to open that session against a username and account. What this token represents is that username / account in base 64 format. Okay, so let's back this back out. Let's back this back out. I'm going to go look at my security dialog. My security dialog. Okay, I have here an account that says API access. And the password for this one is, cleverly enough, API access. All right, so I'm going to open up my data viewer, and I want to show you how to get your basic token. All right, so I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to say base 64 encode, quote, API access, / API access, close quote. Now notice this value right here. I'm going to screenshot this. All right, so I'm going to open this back up, and I'm going to drag this over, open it up, drag it over, and I'm going to blow this up so we can see it. Now notice, that's where that token comes from. The base 64 encoded credentials of the account you're going to use to open the session. That means you do have to know the account name and password you're going to use to open the session. Once the session is open, you no longer use the credentials. You use the token. The token is what is returned down here. I've got that in my response, okay? And that is what you'll use from now on. Okay, let's look at another call. This one is to close an API session. Now, in this case, I am sending it a parameter to my script of token / token. I have the script configured to substitute the token in where it sees this little double caret thingy. Now notice my base endpoint + session / token. That's all I need to close the session. So if I run this script, notice my token goes away and my session on the server is closed. So if I look at my close API session, that's all it is. That's it. I don't have to send any data. I don't have to send anything because it's a delete session. So FileMaker server knows that it's to delete the session represented by that token. Okay. This is how we normally do it, is we write a script for each operation, because if I want to open a session to a particular file, then I can always run the script that says open an API session in that file. If I want to close the session, I can always run the script that says close that session. Now, if you want to get fancier, you could abstract all your curl and then just say, I have one script that sends a curl command and, you know, do your conditionals and parse out what command I'm going to send, what's my method, what's my data package, and so on and so forth. If you want to do that, that's great. I prefer it's a little more straightforward. Okay, so once I've closed my session, I have to go back and open another session so I have a valid token. This is another little point. There are different schools of thought on how you should maintain your tokens. Some people say, well, once I open a session, I'm just going to keep using that token until the server kicks it back and tells me it's no good, because the server will close a token or close a session 15 minutes after the last use. So if I generate a token and I sit around for 15 minutes and 3 seconds, the server's going to close it out. And if I try to use that token again, it's going to throw it back and say invalid token. Now, the folks who like that will like to say, well, we don't like to burden the server with opening a lot of sessions. And that's fine if that's your preference. My preference, my personal preference, is to open the session, do what I need to do, and then close it because I'm kind of a neat freak about cleaning up after myself. I don't like leaving sessions open on the server that I no longer need. So there's, like I said, there's two schools of thought, and honestly, I don't know which one is better on performance for the server as far as leaving sessions open that are not used versus having to open new sessions for every operation. It probably depends on how many sessions you're actually opening and closing in a given time frame. All right, so now I've got a new session. Now here's a fairly simple script. I want to fetch the first 100 records from my table here. So I have fetch first 100 records. Let's look at that script. Okay, this is a fairly simple script. If we go in this script and we look, we say, okay, here's my base endpoint plus layouts / email addresses / records. This tells me that when I fetch the records, this is my URL to point to, the base endpoint plus this URL. Now, obviously, email addresses represents the name of the layout. Remember I said almost everything the API does is layout centric. So you can control the data that are returned by the API by controlling what fields are present on the layout. And in this case, it is a GET request, okay? So we do have a data package. Why do we have a data package with a GET request? Because our data is an empty JSON object. Remember I mentioned some calls require that you have an empty JSON object. So that would be in this case as well. Also notice here, my authorization has changed. It's no longer authorization basic with that token, that hard-coded token in there. It's now authorization bearer with the token that was generated from my session. So like I said, once you generate that token, that's the thing that you use for access from that point forward. You don't ever send credentials again unless you need to open another session, okay? So let's see what this bad boy does. I'm gonna run this script, and then I'm over here in my data viewer. I'm going to say JSON format elements response. All right, because obviously our screen share is messing with my pretty version. But here we have the response that you will get back from FileMaker server when I request pretty much any kind of a find request. This is the first 100 records, but it will also give this very similar response, as we'll see in a minute when we actually do a find request. So what do we have here? We have a messages element that tells me the response code is 0, which means success, and the message is okay. If there is an error of some sort associated with the call, then you will get the error code here and the corresponding definition. These will be FileMaker error codes. So for example, if I get a 100 error, it means file is missing. Or if I get a 101 error, it means table is missing, so on and so forth. It will tell you that in the message. Okay. Down here we have the response. Now under response, we have a data element, which with a square bracket, that tells us it's what sort of element. It is an array. And then we have a number of objects here is a object. Now each object represents a record.
Hey, Mike.
Yes, ma'am.
Your text is so small. Is there any way you could increase your windows so it's a little better?
I thought it was pretty big. Okay.
It's probably pretty big for you, but since you're sharing your entire screen and not just that one window,
okay,
we're having a hard time seeing it all.
How does that look?
The easiest way is going to be to change your screen resolution. When you zoom, it doesn't work when you zoom in, it doesn't work in this app. But change your screen resolution to like 1152 or 1024, something like that.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that, but okay.
Well, and I've set my view options in Zoom to original size as opposed to fit to window.
Oh, that definitely is helping. Yeah.
That's also helpful.
That's what I did too.
Thanks, guys. Okay. Sorry to ruin your flow, Mike. I just wanted everyone to be able to see what you're talking about.
Good. Well, yeah, that's kind of important. Let's see. All right, tell you what.
We're good. If everyone, increases the view options to 100% instead of fit to window, I think it's good.
So the zooming does not work.
We're good.
Which tell me that doesn't make it bigger?
Nope. You're good though.
Oh, great. I'm wasting my time. Okay. All right. So anyway, if we look at this data element here, this is a record. Now notice we only have 2 fields, but each field will be an element with the field name and the value. If you have related fields on the table, they will be related table : field name in the same standard FileMaker notation we're all used to. Okay. It gives you the mod ID, which might be useful. If it has a portal on the layout, you will see it in portal data, and it will be a series of records just like field data based on the portal. And it gives you a record ID. The record ID becomes important later if we want to do something different with that record. Okay, but then once we get past this is 100 records, and I'm going to try and get down to the bottom because there's some additional information at the bottom. Response.data gives me the data. Response.dataInfo gives me some information about the call, the database, the total record count, the returned count, the found count, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, these can be important later too. All right, so we're good with the first 100 records. All right, let's move on. Now, what if I want to actually, first 100 records is great, but what if I actually want to do something useful like find a particular record? All right, that's when you start putting in a query. Now, a query will be, oh, for pity's sake. Let's see. A query is going to be this portion right here. It's going to be an array with a parent keyword of query, and then each query underneath that is an object in the array. Now, a query corresponds to a find request. So in this case, I have one find request because there's one, there's one JSON object here. It says I want the type to be equal to personal. So if I run that script, and I shouldn't have deleted that, JSON format. Okay. Now, in this case, notice that every one I return has a type of person. So FileMaker has returned to me the data for everything that's personal. Now, I can add another criterion to this find request. Well, I won't add another criterion because this thing keeps wonking out on me. But anyway, if I wanted to add another criterion to it, I could add that inside this JSON object. So I could say like type personal and address, A or something, and it would fetch all the addresses beginning with A that were typed personal. Or I can add another JSON object inside the array and have it do a second find request, which would be, as we know, an OR. Okay. So don't be confused by the extra query and token stuff here. That's just me passing the parameter in to the script. Okay. Now, if I want to create a record, this is where it gets fun. To create a record, my payload includes a field data element in which I define all of the necessary fields as a JSON object. Notice my address is phony@notadomain.com, and my type is added. All right, so let's look over here for a minute. The very, very bottom. Come on, very bottom. Okay, we're down here at record number 25,622. Okay, 25,622. Oops. All right, now if I go over here and I run this script, notice what happened at the bottom here. Record number 26,000 or 25,623 is the record that I sent. Okay, it has a type of added and a record of phony@notdomain.com. And I really need to save my. All right, let's do that. Okay, so in this case, my response gives me success, and it tells me my record ID is 25,631. Okay, 25,631. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this on the next one, because I can't edit the silly thing because I can't see it. All right, anyway, this one would be to delete a record. Now notice in your URL up here, we have the record ID. The record ID tells it that I want to delete the record corresponding to that record ID, which was returned. Oh boy, this screen thing is really messing with me here. Okay, the record ID was 25,631, right? Okay, 25,631. I don't know if I can, let's see if I can do something about, well, let me do it over here. Oh, yes, it will. Okay, cool. Let me just see if I can get it. Screen sharing is messing up my. All right, so 25,631 is my record ID. All right, let's go back to our main screen here. Ugh. Wow. All right, so notice we still have our phony@notdomain.com down here with the added. All right, I'm going to tell it to run this script. It gives me that response, and notice that record is now gone. It's deleted from the system. So it's very much, if you've ever used the PHP API or the XML API before that, it's very similar to that. You need the record ID in order to manipulate a specific record. Now notice that the record ID is not persistent. In other words, if I make a clone of a file and then import the data, the records will have all new record IDs. So you can't use that as a key field. So you'll have to fetch it and then use it immediately. Okay, those are all the samples. Now in our scripts here, we have all those scripts, and I will make this, I'll make this available to everybody for you to play with. And it has all these scripts in here to do all these wonderful things. These are the basics of the API. All right, so let's go back to our presentation. All right, some concluding thoughts. Using APIs is really where the modern web economy is. They're powerful, they're fast, they're universally understood. Now, one thing about the FileMaker Data API, because it's specific to layouts and specific to the solution, you will find that if someone wants access to your application, then they will need to have you act as an intermediary. In other words, you have to give them the endpoint and the necessary submitted data to interact with your application. The generic FileMaker Data API just allows you to build an actual API for your application. So kind of get that in your mind that you can't just send somebody to the data API documentation page and say, here, you can access my app with this, because they can't. They have to have credentials, they have to have layouts to point it to, and so forth. Okay, absolutely crucial, you must learn JSON. Fortunately, it's not too hard, but if you don't understand JSON, if you can't manipulate JSON, you will not be able to use the API. Okay, so let's remember some of our use cases for this. Non-FileMaker system integration, outside apps that want access to our data, outside apps that want to submit data to us. Okay, FileMaker to FileMaker integration, passing data between FileMaker apps without having to deal with credentials, without having to deal with the security issues associated with allowing people to put table occurrences on my graph or putting their table occurrences on their graph or whatever. Standardized functional modules. We do this a fair bit here. It makes it a lot easy. If I want to use an error or performance log, I have one. All I have to do is drop it on the server and modify the script to correspond. All right. Well, thank you. Please don't hesitate to contact us. If you want a separate copy of the slides and demo files, I'll be happy to provide it to you. I'm going to give it to AppWorks as well, so they'll have it available. You can contact us through any of these means. That's my personal work number there, my email address. So there's time for questions. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. And let's see here.
Mike, we have a question in the chat. Actually, the first question was kind of early on to your presentation. What about URL and case sensitivity?
Let's see, case sensitivity. I believe it is case sensitive, if I recall correctly. I think we had some problems when we were developing the mobile app with certain things. Actually, we discovered one thing that's really weird about it. If I do a find request in FileMaker in a text field, it is not case sensitive. It will find it regardless. However, if I submit a find request over the API, it becomes case sensitive. We found this out with email addresses. If you submit the email address, it becomes case sensitive, even if you escape the @ symbol, which is a FileMaker character substitution. So that was really weird, but that is something to watch out for. Okay. Let's see, what else do we have here? API session, does an API session consume a concurrent connection? No, API sessions do not consume concurrent connections. Let's see. Does anyone have any? Yeah, okay. Text is small. Sorry about that. Quick looks at JSON. We have.
Yeah, that's about it for the questions in the chat. So now if you want to open it up to anyone that has anything.
Yeah, by all means.
I have a quick question. It looked like you had your cursor in a field in that record that you deleted via the API, the one that you had just created. And I don't know whether you hadn't locked the record because you weren't actually making any change to it, or whether the API ignores FileMaker server's usual server client record locking.
No, I had not locked the record because I had not started editing it. And yes, the API will respect record lock. It'll return an error. Yeah, it'll return an error if you try to delete a record, for example, that's locked, or if you try to edit a record that's locked.
Thank you.
Also, Mike, just a quick thing I'd like to confirm when building the call, like if you are building a query, the fields you're using in the query do not need to be on the layout. It's only what you expect to see in the return that needs to be on the layout. Is that right?
I believe that's true, yes.
So Mike, do you have any suggestions or tidbits on how to get from Postman to FileMaker? I just struggle with getting those formats.
Sure, let's see. If I open up Postman here, all right, I'm just gonna look at some curl. I'm not gonna share, well, maybe I can share it. All right, so if I look at the code. All right.
Your screen again.
Yeah, let me share the screen. Just let's just share Postman. All right, there we go. Everybody see that okay? Okay. The URL is encoded separately, so you don't really even need that, right? So what you would do here is you would just take out, well, you can copy the whole thing. You think you can copy, just copy the whole code, and then you paste it in a text editor or whatever, okay? Now in this case, this would be, you would go in here, let's open up a text window. we'll just open up a text editor. I don't have to share the whole screen, sorry. All right, here we go. All right, so I've copied the text from Postman. Well, if I can get it to drag over, come on, Bubba. There we go. All right, so I don't need any of this stuff up here. So I would do this, -x post. I don't need any of this stuff, because all this stuff is already in my URL inside FileMaker in the insert from URL script step. So I can get rid of that. I can leave that -- header. You can do -H. I forget what the difference is, but they both work. So anyway, and then authorization bearer, and then you would want to get rid of that because you have the token, right? Content type, that stays. Data, raw, and then this would be your data payload. This is your JSON object, okay? Now, if I wanted to do this in FileMaker, I put a quote here, and a quote here, ampersand, okay? Then I do a quote here, oops, I mean to delete that. And then I do quote, oh, now I'm confused. Hold on a second. Oh, for Pete's sake. You're causing me problems. Come on.
I always do it in the data viewer.
Yeah, it is easier to do in the data viewer, honestly. So, anyway. Okay, there we go. So, but you would basically do what's there, and you just substitute in what you want. Honestly, what I do typically is I don't even really copy from Postman that much. I just check it to make sure it's working, because in Postman, you have all of these other elements. If I look in Postman here, so for example, this is one of our test servers. I can set up the server name, the database, the username, the password, the layout. The token is generated when I run the authentication request. And notice you have these variable names here. And this is all part of that FileMaker data API collection on GitHub. So honestly, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about doing the syntax because I just let that do it. I'm too busy solving problems to mess with the syntax too much. So I would actually recommend that very highly. Go and get that collection off of Postman, or off of GitHub rather, for Postman, because it'll solve so many problems for you.
I have a question, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way of doing an omit in the finds, and can it be used in a multi-criteria find?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there is. As a matter of fact, it's in the documentation.
Well, do you know what the syntax is?
Not off the top of my head.
Oh, that's okay. I can look it up then.
Yeah, it's in the documentation.
Okay, thank you.
What type of authorization do you have to have? I'm sorry if I missed it, if you already said.
Oh, well, there's an extended privilege. I think it's called FM API, if I remember correctly, but it has to be enabled for the account that you use to get the token.
I mean, how do you authorize the request? Do you have to use OAuth?
No, your first, yeah, you must have missed that one. Your first request is to open a session, and you pass it base 64 encoded string that consists of username : password
That's right.
for the account that is enabled for the API in that database. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does the when we create that session, the session doesn't have a timeout, an automatic timeout on it, does it?
Actually does. All of the API sessions time out and are terminated 15 minutes after last use. So if it's 14 minutes and 59 seconds and you bump it, it's good for another 15 minutes.
I have another question. the first implementation of the data API that I worked on was for a service connecting to my FileMaker system, an outside service, and that service didn't have any way to deal with the token-based session credential. And I wonder if you've run into that trying to integrate something that cannot do this sort of modern approach to security, and how you've handled it. I have a solution that works in my case, but I'm curious whether you've have a workaround for that.
I have run into it, and I've basically told them you need to figure out a way to do it on your end. But if they absolutely cannot, then you can do something like write a little PHP page that generates a token and then passes it back to them. So then they can use it for all their future calls. Or you could even write a little PHP page that keeps track of their token and just continues to use it each time they hit it. That's usually what people do in that situation. Or you could use Python, or you can use whatever. It doesn't have to be PHP.
Yeah, I hired someone to build a little node service.
Oh, that would work too, sure.
And so it sounds like those approaches are all similar. Just pick your language of choice, script it on the server side to do the song and dance with the token. Thanks.
And you didn't mention, but I presume folks know that you can also call scripts through the data API.
Yes, you can. Yeah, I didn't get that far. This was supposed to be a training wheels session, so.
Well, I go right into the head first crash, make it.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, fellas and ladies.
It was informative. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Good. Glad everyone enjoyed it. Like I said, feel free to contact me if you have questions or if you just want to bounce ideas.
Nicely done. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Okay. My pleasure.
Yeah, so I'll wrap this up. Does anyone have, kind of at the end of these meetups for anyone that's new, we've talked about if there are any job opportunities available right now or any kind of pressing news that anyone has or general development questions if anyone is super new to the platform. I want to open it up and just take a couple minutes to do so if anyone would like to.
I have two general questions. One is anybody working on a Linux server and have any, particularly any yellow flags or red flags to watch out for there?
Yeah, I've been, I took an old Mac Mini, it's the 6,2, late 2012, I think. It was the last server Mac Mini that they made with the two. I had it configured with two SSD drives in it. And it works really well. It's fast. It was pretty easy. You have to, there's a few little things to get the ISO file to work properly on a like if you put it on a flash drive. And I ran into one really unusual little strange thing. I don't know if it has anything to do with running CentOS 7 on a Linux, or excuse me, on a Mac machine. But everything, I download some tools, wget, and a few things that I need to work with the system. And Yum update, it just destroys everything. So I don't know why that's happening. I'm running it on I'm also running it on actually on this Mac I'm on right now on VMware. I can run Yum update and it just updates CentOS no problem. But when I run it on the Mac, it won't reboot. It just turns into a brick. So I don't know. But other than that, I just moved some files over this morning that I was running on a Windows 2012 server locally. And I've got a script timer running in the background to see how fast processes are. And it is screaming fast on a minimal CentOS. I'm just amazed. Pretty much everything else being equal, 16 gigs of RAM, and well, in all fairness, the Mini does have SSD, and the Windows box does not. But anyway, it is screaming fast. It's nice. I like it.
Yeah, I've done an install. Actually, I've done 2 or 3 as I tried to figure this out up on Amazon instance, an EC2 instance, and so far so good. Haven't transferred other than one test database over, and I haven't gone through the admin process, but it looks to be clean. So I'm encouraged by that.
It's a great use of an old Mac box that you can't upgrade anymore.
Great.
Well, does anyone have anything else, or we can wrap it up early if we need to, but I don't want to cut off anyone that has a question or anything else about Linux Server. I know that we've been playing around with it. All right, well, I guess thank you everyone, especially Mike. And we will post this recording to our YouTube channel and send it out if anyone would like to rewatch it or send it. We hope to see you all next time.
Excellent.
Thanks for hosting.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.